So we're going to try to like keep our presentation kind of short and just go into questions and what you guys want to talk about, because if we tried to like hit all the points, I don't know if they'd be relevant to you. And I would say the bulk of what we're going to talk about though is collaboration and working within multiple disciplines that have separate histories, and what it means to be, or I don't know if it's what it means, but like what it's looked like for us, or what those forms are when we work with disciplines that have different histories. And for us, it's largely like curating, painting, performance, collaboration, like those things we have like
social sculpture.
Social sculpture, okay. So this is actually just quick, Ben and I's first collaboration in like 2007 or something. Nine, as artists. We just like did this piece at a artist-run space where it was a garage and a basement, and they would have two-person shows. And we did ours as like a full-on collaboration where we both claimed full authorship for everything, and had this really weird experience where people said that this was Ben's piece and that was my piece. And that was a total read from the audience because we planned these like together. And so it's kind of a weird gender thing where it was like, oh, so what, the girl made the fabric and the boy made the walls or something? I don't know, it's weird. But it kind of set a tone for us working together where we thought it's a lot more interesting just to claim complete shared authorship and to really refuse like any sort of like designation of somebody being like the person who is like whatever, the smart person or the creative person.
And I think that the model for that first show that we collaborated on, where we had two spaces that we could work with, that was very inspiring for us. And it's how we modeled our own space, where we had there's a 2-floor space, and the second floor is like a clean white cube gallery, and then the ground floor is an old boiler room that has brick walls. It kind of looks like a dungeon. And so we were really interested in having two contexts that we could juxtapose and curate shows in, and have there be two artists, one in one space, one in the other, and have the interaction of those two practices kind of create
a third
meaning.
Other context. And it was both as like a physical environment. We really wanted these different spaces, but also the histories that they reference. So like the white cube being institutional, and then the downstairs being like whatever weird artist run stuff. So this is like our first show, and this piece is by Maria Johnson, and it was the absolute largest thing that we could get in the doorway on the first show. Our
first show, that's what we showed, it was the biggest possible thing you could show in that space.
So maybe we'll like flip through these a little bit quickly.
Okay.
But if you guys see an image that catches your attention, just like when we get to questions, let us know. We'll go back to it and talk about it more.
So in the downstairs space was Greg Stymack. You don't want to show Greg's?
Oh, okay, yeah.
I just want to show it real quick, which is he rented a helicopter and shot a video on the 4th of July in high-def video, and he showed that in a black box from an airplane that they have to take video. He reconfigured that to be the player for this video. And so this is just a still image from that piece. And it looked like war footage.
It looked like a battlefield. It was kind of creepy footage, yeah. So that show that was like the upstairs, downstairs of that show. The next thing that we would do for every exhibit is we would do a closing performance. And we tried to make sure that these 3 different people that we were working with, or groups of people, were from different contexts, whether that was the type of work that they were making or from where they physically lived. So Maria was like pretty like entrenched in sculpture and design, Greg in photography, and then this is the closing performance, which was Andy Ortman, who is a noise artist. And although some of these artists maybe had heard of each other, it really wasn't kind of scenes that mingled that much. And so for these events, it was like a really dynamic scene. I mean, mostly artists, but artists who don't often spend time with each other's work. And that was like a big motivation for us with how we programmed.
So that's Andy. And the piece that he did was called Composition for 4 Motorcycles and 4 Synthesizers. And he brought 4 motorcycles into the space and put them in the 4 corners. And he put the synthesizers against the walls. And he recorded a quadraphonic album.
He ran each motorcycle through a synthesizer.
So they just ran the motorcycles and recorded the sound of the 4 cycles, making a real like reverberation in the space. And that lasted for about 45 minutes.
The timing was they all revved their engines until they ran out of gas. So simultaneously, the whole space is like filling with carbon monoxide.
It was pretty terrifying. If you look at this first image, you can really see where, well, I guess that's just me covering it. But he had that on.
Yeah, and it was this really intense endurance thing where everybody was, we got nervous actually because it seemed really dangerous, but people were like, no, we're in it, we're doing this, we're gonna like, we're gonna be here with this. So these are the performers. This is, I don't even talk about John.
It's our second show. It's John Monza, and he's a painter who's based out of New York, and he makes these kind of minimal paintings, maybe kind of Ryman-esque, but they're a little less didactic, I think. They're a little more personal. And we paired him with Cameron Crawford, who showed in the downstairs space. And this is probably like one of the single most weird objects I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird object. And this is a really weird story, too, because so this is the first solo show that Cameron ever did. He had just finished graduate degree at Northwestern. And we went out of our way to work with people who we felt like were really talented but weren't having opportunities to show. It was kind of a unsaid, sometimes said mission. And we did that by just doing a ton of studio visits. And we still do that. We love looking at work, and anytime we can, we like look at a lot of work. And Cameron was somebody who we'd known for a little bit and seen his recent work, and it was just like totally blew us away. And then within 10 months after this show, he was in the Whitney Biennial with this work. And so we were like sent a loan form from
it was an intense it was really early on in our project, and Cameron he was up for an award, a grant, and he brought the panel. He was allowed to take the panel wherever he wanted, so he brought them to our space to see the installation. And I think it was a hit because he got the grant, and then he moved to New York and
got some studio visits.
And, in the process of leaving to New York, he donated the work to us because he couldn't take it.
Yeah, it was going to be thrown away.
It was going to be thrown out.
And so we also collect as much work as possible. We have a New Capital Family Collection, which is a lot of pieces that we acquire through trade of our own art objects, but that we also take on when people are like, oh, I have this piece, I'm going to have to throw it away because I'm moving, or I don't have money to store it, or whatever. So that's the New Capital Family Collection, and this piece became a part of that. And it was kind of just like a bizarro world when your weirdest like fantasy art project all of a sudden
has major support
and is shown like nationally. It was just a very surprising thing. But what was interesting about that is that then we took on this role of representing Cameron, but doing it in an official capacity. We talked to Cameron about it, that we're interested in this as a kind of as like role playing for us, where we're like,
it became this behavior where we're functioning kind of as dealers, kind of being treated as collectors, but doing all that activity as artists.
So this is Esme performing in the loading dock. So in our space, there's the upstairs, the downstairs, there's a train yard in the back, and then this is a loading dock that connects to the downstairs. And for the first year of shows, we did performances in there until we no longer had access to it. But this is one of the early shows there. And this was a performance. Esme is based in Minneapolis, and she's kind of a great, like, she's a performer, she's a theorist, she's, so many different things. And she performed during a show that was all about surface and
artifice,
and it largely was a painting show. So again, some groups that don't always mingle, but different disciplines coming at one topic or one idea.
This is the Earth Show. And this was the one show that we did where it wasn't 2 solo shows. Instead, it was 3 artists, and they each presented one work upstairs, an individual work, and then they collaborated on a piece in the downstairs space, which is this. And it was decidedly not an artwork, but something that the 3 artists made collaboratively using their artistic skills.
That's the language.
That's how they described it.
That's the language that was developed through lengthy conversations. And they were really resisting a lot of ideas about collaboration, so it was an interesting artists for us to work with, because we really take on all of the mess of that. And their idea was that artists working together is not collaboration. Everything you do is not art. There's very specific things are art, and as an artist, you have to make those decisions. And it's possible that everything around you could look like art, or be talked about like art, but it's not until you say that it is. And so they were really interested in making something that would seem to be art, but that is not. And
that's what really drew us to the proposal. And so what they did essentially is they flooded the gallery with a ton of gravel, literally a ton of gravel. And
which
then
lifted the floor by this much.
And then they found those blocks, those 4 blocks from the foundation of our building, because at the time there was a lot of work being done, and so there were these huge rocks, and they dragged those in and made this table, and then they presented 6 objects from geological time.
But they did this by going to, I don't know how much time you guys spend in Chicago, if you ever get over there. There's this place called Dave's Rock Shop, and Dave has got a museum in the basement of his store of artifacts from geological time, including dinosaur eggs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's the most amazing collection, and it's in his store. So he has a commercial store where you could just buy rocks and gems, and these are things that he's collected over the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's free and open to the public, and museums are always trying to get these objects from him. And he's like, no, just keep it here in my store in my basement.
Does he excavate them?
Yeah, he excavates them himself. Yeah. It's he's a pretty interesting character.
So they went to him and they asked if they could borrow some things.
And he said yes, which was amazing.
So do we have a close-up of that?
I don't think we do, no.
Okay, well, you can kind of see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the thing you see at the top left of the table is a Homo sapien hand axe.
Mm-hmm. It's an early tool.
It's one of the earliest tools. And then the piece next, what is the thing next?
That's the pyrite cube.
Which is the only naturally forming cube in nature. And then I think we had woolly mammoth hair on there.
Woolly mammoth hair. There was a meteorite called the Allende meteor, which is a meteor that fell to Earth, I forget when, but it comes from a place in space that the rock is actually older than our sun. So it's
material.
It's really weird.
Than our gallery, yeah. And then actually what I'm holding here is our poster, and making posters was a huge part of our production. We made a poster for every show. A lot of times the artist would design it. We started it by saying we'd do an edition of 50, but it was not like that. It would actually be it's an edition of 33 this time, or 75 or whatever, and then we'd give them away for free. So a lot of people have a bunch of these posters.
And there's some interesting history too about this piece.
Yeah, so this piece is now being
the
acquired
non-art piece
by the Pulitzer Foundation as an artwork. And we're just now getting into how that's going to be talked about, since it's not an artwork. is it an artwork now? I don't know.
But it will be on permanent display at the Pulitzer Foundation in St. Louis.
So now we're skipping ahead. Like, those are just like a few projects. Now we're skipping ahead to 24 Hours, 25 Days, which was our final exhibition.
In the physical space.
In the physical space. And basically what we did was we put a call out. This is where also I think we revealed a little bit more about our own personal creative positions and things with the project. Because for the 2 years that we started from the beginning saying we're only going to do this for 2 years because we knew that we don't want to run a gallery. But we wanted to work with a lot of artists that we're interested in. We wanted to I think we wanted to have an intimate experience with some work that maybe we felt like we didn't fully understand.
And I think it felt like a form in itself that would be fun as artists to explore.
Yeah. And so anyway, but we didn't talk about it or express our own kind of art practice within that, not explicitly. But for our final show, 24 Hours, 25 Days, we were more open about it as a performance, as like a full-on collaboration. So we put a call out to everyone, and that was the language in the in our letter, and we sent it to like every distribution channel that we had, and it just said, "Dear everyone, you're invited to do anything at any time." And we programmed the upstairs, the downstairs, and the train yard for 24 hours straight. So in
for 25 days.
For 25 days. So in every space, there was either an exhibit going up or an opening happening or a performance happening. And, you know, people would come to like an opening for one thing, and then somebody would be installing something else, and the audience from the opening would go over and help the artist install. And it just was like constant activity. And this is like going into images of that.
So this is, what you're looking at is Dan Killis, who you see sitting in the center. He's a teacher at the Art Institute, and he wanted to have his class come and give their final presentations in our gallery space as a project.
It was a big it was like their graduate thesis or something.
Yeah. So that was one thing that happened.
And well, we should also say that downstairs there was this was kind of poor scheduling. We tried to schedule them in a really smart way that was supportive of all of the work, but this was a little chaotic because there was a practice for a performance
That was very loud.
that involved the 5 performers making a kind of like a soundtrack with their bodies by like throwing their bodies against the building. So they would like throw themselves on the floor and then grunt, and they'd be like, and then be like, So there was like all of this grunting and slamming going on downstairs. It was a little bit, I don't know. It's like.
It was a little intense.
But then they ordered pizza and everybody ate pizza together.
That's true. This is Ghosts, which is
Tyson Reader.
It's Tyson Reader and Incorporated.
Whatever.
His entourage.
But the way that they do their band is it's totally open.
Right.
Anybody can come and play. I mean, it's a little bit
But you have
like,
to wear a sheet over your head like a ghost.
and they howl while they play these instruments.
They're a lot
And they
of
turn
fun.
the lights out. Yeah.
This is Hui Yun Sun, and she did something called Private Feast, where that's kind of her performative work. Is she organizes these dinners, and she asks people to come and bring ingredients, and then she pairs them up with the ingredients that they bring, and then they kind of have like
But
a cook-off.
it's an ingredient from their personal history that they feel represents either their cultural identity or their, like, who they are somehow. And so when they share the ingredients, they have to have that conversation. And the other people say, like, oh, cinnamon is this to me, or
Right.
whatever.
thought
And
the
she
table
makes-
setting looks so beautiful.
Yeah, and she makes the dish. Well, some of these are thrifted, you can tell, but she also makes these really nice ceramic.
Yeah, a lot of these ceramics are handmade. Well, the one on the red plate, that one is for sure Hoyens.
Right. Yeah. One on the far left, with the talking bubble. It kind of looks like a talking bubble. All of her dishes look like thought bubbles, and then she writes kind of like in cursive. She writes kind of confessions about thoughts that she's embarrassed that she had, and so you eat the food and you can't help but read her embarrassing thoughts. They're really good.
That's Shane Mecklenburger. He's someone that we actually didn't know. He's somebody who drove out from, I think, Philadelphia. I'm not exactly sure how he heard about us. And he presented this kind of weird project, and we were like, yeah, great. It was these diamonds that he gets made out of different things. I guess you can have a diamond made from anything. And so one was from, I think, an aardvark roadkill.
You just need enough pressure.
Here's a little detail. So and then he makes these custom glass cases of an aardvark for the diamond that was made from the aardvark roadkill. There were 3 other ones. I don't remember what they were. The aardvark was the one that I was just like, all right, it's great. It's perfect. This is Vince Tilley, and his proposal was to dance for 24 hours straight, and the only thing that he would drink was Gatorade.
And he had 16 different DJs. They're all close friends of his, and all the DJs had their own kind of mini following. So they would all play like maybe an hour and a half each or something.
Yeah, something like that.
So there was like every hour and a half or so, there was like a really different dance party vibe, and some of it would overlap and some of it wouldn't. But by the end of the night, he started at midnight and ended at midnight. So from like 9 p.m. to midnight, when he was finishing up, it turned into like a huge
dance party.
And the room was like 15 degrees hotter, and he was just like bright red and sweating and barely able to move, and everybody was terrified he was going to pass out.
And his parents flew in from Miami, which was really sweet.
Mom and Dad came.
And at the end of the performance, he collapsed and his dad carried him out.
Everybody was crying. There was
The whole
slow
room was
clap.
crying. It was,
Everyone was chanting.
yeah.
No, people wouldn't leave. People were like backing out of the room slowly.
Yeah.
They were like, "You did it, man! You did it!" These are his shirts he made. He gave out those shirts.
Oh yeah, he gave out those shirts.
So downstairs.
At the same time, down as this was happening
This
upstairs.
is a better program. This was a more successful programming. This is a piece by Edra Soto, who is from Puerto Rico, married an American, and had this kind of intense experience with their wedding cake where her mom wanted them to have this like really, like her mom's idea of what an ideal American wedding cake would be, which in her mom's idea of it, it was like a perfect white kind of tiered princess cake thing. And Edra just wanted a pineapple upside down cake. And she ended up doing the cake that her mom wanted and like regretted it forever. And so she started celebrating her wedding anniversary by making a pineapple upside down cake. And this was their 10-year wedding anniversary. So she made 10 pineapple upside down cakes. And they were there for 24 hours with coffee. So while Vincent danced and other people danced, they would come down and eat cake and celebrate Edra's 10-year wedding anniversary. And they're really tasty.
They're really good cakes.
They're really good. And that turned into, so the most exciting thing about this project was that it was really kinetic, like all these other relationships happened. There was an artist we worked with whose name was Sarah Weber, and her family had a bakery. They have like one of the oldest bakeries in Chicago. It was called Weber's.
Weber's Bake, yeah.
And one of the things that she did was, so part of her art practice has been defined by the schedule of her family, have these like bakers. So she's used to getting up at like 4 in the morning. And she always talked about how it's this weird relationship to artistic culture because people are going to bed at 4 in the morning. And so she did this piece for like 7 days where she would bring baked goods at like 5 or 6 in the morning. And sometimes people would come, sometimes they wouldn't. But through that, Edra and Sarah connected.
They connected.
And then Edra shared the recipe with
With the
Weber,
bakery.
with Weber's Bakery. And then did they start making her cake? And
They started to make her cake.
they started to make her cake, and when she wants a cake for a piece, they make it for her. So that's the swap. So now Edra doesn't have to make them when she wants to have.
And
like
a lot of
12
people
pineapples
learned
in
about her
cake.
cake at this event, and so now a lot of times when other people have events, they ask Edra to make a
cakes.
cake for it.
But then she goes to Weber's Bakery, and they make the cakes. This is NonGrata. This was actually not in 24 hours, 25 days.
This was kind of like a secret performance through another space, and they needed to find a venue where they could do this performance. They had these performance artists who were coming in from, where are they from? Are they Dutch?
No.
No.
It's an Eastern European. I'll remember in a second.
I'm sorry, I forget where they're from exactly. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to have an audience come in to destroy a car, and they couldn't do it at their gallery.
The gallery is Defibrillator, which is like a really great. It's probably like one of the only spaces in Chicago that's dedicated
Solely
to
to
performance,
performance.
and only to performance art, and also to like a really European idea about live art, and it's kind of a different thing than I think what gets a lot of play here. So we would have a lot of rapport with them because we also were one of the only spaces that did a lot of performance. And their space is on a storefront on Milwaukee Avenue. It's super busy. So what they did, and then we were legitimately concerned about any kind of like legality. So they did something where they had people sign up in advance, and it'd be like a non-disclosed location.
Mm-hmm.
And then all these people took a bus.
They bust the audience
So
in.
the audience got bussed in. And then, the car got destroyed. There's like an electronica live performance, like live sound thing happening with a lot of police sirens, which was really stressful because you couldn't tell if the police were actually coming or if it was part of the performance. Not to mention there's like sledgehammers and fire everywhere, so you're just
It was really fun because the audience was allowed to take a sledgehammer and just go at it.
Okay, so this is in there because this was like one thing that we did as part of our collaboration in the midst of all of this activity. And this is in a place in Pilsen called The Pods. It's like a whole street of storefront windows, and they program public art there. And this was like a really different venue than Ben and I had ever explored. It's like super, super public. And I think it's just an example of always seeking out different contexts and exploring those things. So like at the height of doing this kind of rarefied gallery project, we pretty intentionally took on like the most public friendly, public access site for our own objects.
Yeah, this was part of the International Sculpture Conference, and then it got picked up by the city of Chicago, and so yeah, it was real
And
public. Okay, detail.
This is an example of a curatorial work that also starts to really play with, it's an artwork that really plays with curatorial. I don't know, it's both. Like some of our curatorial work outside of the space is really straight. It's not complicated. It's like somebody gave it the space, they asked about this idea, we put these artists together. It's pretty straight curating, it's not really an artistic gesture.
This show was fun because it was a group show by Trisha
Van
Panak at her space called 6018 North, and this is part of a larger project called the Happiness Project.
And Trisha is a really interesting person because she was at the MCA for like 16 years, and a lot of what she created there was performance. She left. She bought this huge mansion on the north side and turned it into a multi-gallery, every room is its own gallery.
So this show was called Home, Public or Private because she's turned her home into a public space, and she wanted to work with artists who kind of blurred the line or
with their own
who
homes.
somehow used their own home, because our gallery was also
our home.
And so she had us create a room where we presented our work and other artist work and an installation of all those.
We presented a
different
lot
kinds
of
things.
objects that when, like, so so when you go to the gallery, there's like, it gets increasingly private. There's like the 2 floors, and then if you go behind there's a big studio that we share, and there's another studio across the street, and then you go behind there, and it's our live space, but it's most of the live space is like pretty accessible. You know, we host a lot of people there, and then there's like an even more private space. But there's a lot of objects that you start to become protective of when you start having a lot of people in your home, which was like this really weird, I never felt connected or protective of my things before, and that was this weird thing that started happening. So we actually displayed a lot of those objects in this piece, and also displayed a lot of like personal family history, and then a lot of artworks from our own collection, and a lot of our own artworks. It just was like a hot mess of things. And a poster, Michelle. So, okay, so now chronologically we're at 24 hours, 25 days is over.
We're
that
about
show had happened.
6 or 7 months out of having
Yeah.
the space closed.
We're now just using the gallery as our own studio. And the idea was that we would never have public events again. But these 2 artists from Chile, who we had tried to work with the whole time we ran the space, called us and were like, hey, we just got a grant from the Chilean government to do a show somewhere in North America. And we want to do it at New Capital. And we were like, we're closed.
No, we were like, no.
And yes, but then we were like, okay, I'll do a show. So this was like the anomaly show that we like went ahead and did anyway. And they're kind of interesting because they're partners and collaborators, and there's a lot of kind of reciprocal creative models that like I think we feel
We
a lot of
relate to
affinity.
them, yeah. I mean, it was kind of interesting too because they actually started the first artist-run alternative space in Chile.
In 1993
In, like, 90s,
or
yeah.
something, which was like a pretty turbulent time.
So it was great to just spend time with them and talk to them about that project.
And so what this is this is a timber from the train yard, and the chain that you see is made of felt. So Johanna's work is all these sculptures of industrial things that look like parts of machines, but made out of felt. And she gets the felt through like really particular channels that kind of represent different social, I don't know, different politics in terms of where the material comes from. And then she makes it all by hand, and everything they make fits in a suitcase. A lot of their ideas about their work is that it can travel. Like instead of shipping the art, you can ship them. And what you see hanging here is a curtain, and those are Felipe's. One of the things they did after they closed their exhibition space was they would make these curtains, and they would go all over the world to industrial alternative spaces, and they would hang the curtains so that the huge spaces would become a little bit more intimate, and it would like make smaller galleries for other artists to show their work in. So again, like really playing with whose artwork it is, whose exhibition space it is. So that's the flag piece. One of Johanna's hinges. They make a lot of prints. And those images are from posters in the 60s in Chile. You can kind of get a sense of all the modernist ideals. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is a piece by Oren Pinhasi, and this was from the first exhibition that we curated in another space after we closed our space. They're called Iceberg Projects, and they're also in Chicago on the north side. And they have an interesting model because it's not artist run, but it's actually collector run. It's an art collector who just had the resources to turn his kind of coach house into a gallery, and he established a board,
Yeah.
an advisory board, to just kind of like manage the space, and they're actually a really interesting space.
They're nice. There's
Yeah.
a picture of their courtyard, I think, on here.
That's the backyard of this space.
So the brick wall to the left is the coach house that the show is in. And we did a show called Rhodes Scholar, Roads, because we serendipitously met a group of Europeans who were wanting to tour the American South, which is where I'm from. And I was like, "You're going to the South? I'll tell you everywhere to go." And I was really excited because I'd actually been to all of the places where they're from. And I was like, "I know where you're from, I know what that and that." So we gave them this whole like itinerary of the South. And when they got back to Chicago, we hung out quite a bit and, you know, talked about their experience. And it was just kind of an interesting cross-cultural experience. And we decided to show their work for that. It was all their reflections on America, which ended up, this rug or this drawing hanging up, it was interesting. It ended up having a lot to do with immigration and Mexican culture, which was pretty interesting. That's what they like saw most heavily. This is also a performance going on by Murat Adash called Sightseeing, where a group of artists come in and his performers come in and they basically look at you or look at the art
Or the architecture.
And it's pretty intense. It's very silent in there. Okay, so that ends that. Then we're almost done.
So this is our first kind of solo
Gallery
show
exhibition
of our collaborative work after the gallery.
This opened in September. And this is at a place in Chicago called the Hills Aesthetic Center, which is a blast. It's like 3 really motley guys. They've run the space for like 4 or 5 years. It's been around for like 7 years. And they're artists. They have a really similar setup as New Capital did. Their studios are next door. They live there. And so.
Yep.
So this was a show of collaborative painting, and a lot of the paintings that we make are pretty conceptually based. Like we kind of decide ahead of time which aesthetics we're using and why, and then we execute them together. But one of the things that we did during the run of this show was a performance called Sunday Painters, where every Sunday we invited anyone to come and make still life paintings with us. And the rules of the still life painting were that you could work on any canvas, but you had to turn it over to other people, or other people had to work on it also. And the canvas wasn't finished until everyone in the session agreed that it was finished. So it didn't necessarily mean that everyone worked on each canvas, but everyone agrees when it's finished and everyone titles it together. And at the end of this show, we had like a 1-day opening for Sunday Painters that was all of the artworks hung together.
These are just some collages from those sessions. We had 3, so there were 3 sessions. Did you already say that?
No, I didn't say
It was
that.
a still life session, a plein air painting session, and then a portrait session.
That's the plein air. I guess these are mixed.
Yeah.
That pumpkin was part of the still life. It's just like another collaboration.
It's another collaborative piece
So
that
is
we
it-
did at the Center for Green Technology, which is kind of a cool space in Chicago, if you get a chance to go there. They have this huge restoration project, and I think this is the first time that they decided to show sculptures, and they're thinking about how to turn it into a sculpture park.
Basically, it was a site that a cement factory owned, but the city found out it was actually being used as an illegal dump, And so they reseeded it with native grasses to try to like detoxify it. And this was a piece called Droppin.
That's that.
Is that that?
I think so.
Okay, that's that for our pictures for right now.
We could go to, or we could,
Let's wait.
okay.
Let's talk for a bit and see what
Okay.
people want to talk about. So yeah, I think we're gonna like pause right there for a minute and just like see if you guys have any questions or if there's anything you want to talk about.
Can you talk about the importance of being in Chicago maybe? Because it seems like there's a history, more so than maybe Detroit, of like pop-up artist run galleries. Like
Sure.
Detroit, I feel like over the last couple of years has started to have more and more and more, but maybe the success that you guys have had, like, has that been fueled by what's already in Chicago? Or, yeah, if you could just elaborate on that.
I would say, okay, yes, that's an accurate description of Chicago. There's a long history of collaborative practice, of artist-run spaces. So we did have a foundation. But we also kind of ran with it, and we really intentionally pushed all of those things. So I think a lot of the success of it was like, yes, building on what's there, but pushing at the edges of it really, really hard. And like there are a lot of pop-up artist-run spaces and stuff, but I don't know how often people, it's like some people celebrate it and some people don't.
I think Chicago is kind of an incubator for art making, and I think it's because it's a large enough cultural city that you can have access to the rest of the world through it, but there's a limited market, which has, it's a dual effect. The negative effect is that it can't sustain its artists,
At least not through their art.
but the interesting effect is that there isn't pressure to perform for the market, so there's a lot of freedom to explore, and there is a strong community of artists that are capable to engage those kinds of explorations. So you get a lot of feedback, and no one's scared to give you feedback because they're not worried that you're going to make a sale to a collector that they're not going to, because there is no real collector.
I think also every place has quality, like whatever the qualities of any place are, like you can put them to their best use. And the qualities of Chicago that we aggressively tried to put to the best use was space and artists. And that's a big part of our approach in general when we curate anywhere, is trying to really understand like what's going on here, what are the dynamics of this place, whether it's social, whether it's monetary, whether it's physical, the history of it, whatever, and you can figure out like what's the most interesting thing to do here, because every place is conducive, more or less conducive to different types of work.
I have a few. My first one would be, I know you were talking about how during 24 hours, 25 days, or 24 hours,
24 hours, 25 days.
you know, kind of like let what you thought, like, your curatorial, like, vision kind of dictate more than just, like, an artist. Did you ever come up with a specific, like, way to curate a show? Like, I want this show to be about this, and this, I'm going to pick this artist because of this?
During 24 or 25?
No, just like
Oh.
In general?
In general.
In general, that's not really our curatorial style. We did it for that Rhodes Scholar show, where we were like, this show is about an outsider's perspective of the American South, an international outside perspective of the American South. But really what inspired us from the beginning was artists who we felt were fully functional without the need of a curator or an editor, but needed support and needed like facilitation, and maybe needed the criticality that an artist can share, which is different than the criticality that comes from other people.
And a context and a space to actually present the work in a formal way.
Yeah, and in the way that, so we were also, as artists, feeling like, man, how come I've never gotten my dream show? Where somebody's like, here's a beautiful space, and I'm gonna contextualize you, I'm gonna like write a whole page about you, and I'm gonna promote you, and I'm gonna take really beautiful pictures of your work, and I'm gonna share it with really smart people, I'm gonna make sure somebody else writes about it, and we're gonna have a really good time, it's gonna be really nice, we're gonna eat dinner together, it's just gonna be great. And we were both feeling like, man, I've like not had that. So does that even exist? And we were like, well, let's make it happen.
Right.
Even if we can't be the ones getting it, we'll at least get to experience it.
Yeah.
And so from its beginning, we were interested in a different way of working. We weren't interested in like creating the meaning. We were more interested in like sort of, I don't know,
Just kind
more
of
like
providing,
a wet sponge on clay or something, like smoothing it out a little bit.
Right. And in that sense, do you find that like the people that you chose for shows started having a dialogue within your own artistic practice?
Yes.
oh yeah.
Very much. Always, yeah.
Were you making your own personal works while you were curating, or was it always kind of a separate thing?
Total overlap.
That's something
Yeah.
I've always had like trouble with.
It's total overlap. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we weren't always showing it,
Okay.
even in a private kind of studio visit way, because we really wanted to keep the focus on the content of what we were doing, and we wanted to keep the focus on the artists we were working with. And so like even though in this like compound, this huge building that we're in, even though our studio is literally right next door, like very rarely did we invite anybody in.
Okay.
We kept it focused on the gallery.
I'm curious about your process in choosing the artists and the artworks then. If it's like focused on giving these people an opportunity and putting them together and seeing sort of like what's gonna happen, like what's the choosing process like for you guys? Like
When we first started the space, we did 3 tours. We did like a major round of studio visits in Chicago, and then we went to New York and did like I think we were there for 10 days, and we probably scheduled between 6 and 12 studio visits a day, every day while we were there, and we just met with as many people as we could, and then we went to LA and did a tour, and we put a call out before we went, and we emailed as many people as we could.
Either actual friends or peers or some,
And then
that someone else told us to email.
And then we would ask those people whose studio should we be looking at, and then we would go to those studios, and we just kept ourselves scheduled the whole time and just did studio visits.
And we were always really surprised by how open people are. Like when we first started doing that activity, I thought like, why will this person want? And we met with some artists whose work that I'd paid attention to for a few years. They're not like launched far enough into their career where they're like big time yet, but they show, like occasionally they'll show at nice galleries, and they're like in middle space of their careers, and I love their work. And there's people that we got to go see their studios, and they were like, yeah, well, if well, maybe. And we worked with some of those people. It was totally interesting and not what I expected an artist practice to be. I don't know. At that time I had some idea that like, well, once you've had a show at a nice gallery, then you're probably
too busy,
or you don't talk to anybody who's not. I don't know. And it wasn't like that at all. So we just talked with a lot of people. And we still do.
And then after we did that, you just inevitably have tons of conversations, because you're like, oh, do you remember when we were looking at this, or do you remember when we were looking at that? Wouldn't this be a cool thing to show? Would that be a good person to work with? What would happen if you worked with that artist and then that artist? Like,
and we start talking. And you know what never happened though? Because a lot of people ask us like, well, how do you approach the artist about a show? We never ever once went to somebody's studio in order to do a show with them. It was like,
right.
And has never been how we work. We always just have a lot of conversations going with a lot of different people. And then when an opportunity comes up, And sometimes it's not even an opportunity. Sometimes it's like you create an opportunity. You go somewhere and you're like, whoa, what a weird space. Look at all of these, whatever it is, brick walls or whatever. Like, so-and-so's work would be really interesting here. We should put them in contact with somebody. Like, we're also pretty big on hooking people up with other people. So we might not be able to do the show with somebody, but if we hear another curator talking about something, we're really quick to be like, you should call this artist or at least do a studio visit with them. And, you know, it's nice to generate opportunities for people.
I have a question. How did you guys financially sustain this?
It was really hard.
It was hard.
That's the thing, like, I always think about, like, it's so exciting to have space, but it all comes back to the dollar bill. And, like,
Yeah.
how do you do things when there's a lot of grants with the community? Well, I mean, for your space, it probably would be great, you know, great. Like, there's so many grants that are geared towards social practice, you know, that want a community outcome. But I guess in Chicago, maybe, I know that there's,
It's hard though, because a lot of those grants are for nonprofit spaces.
so you have to have the
Yeah.
501c3.
Exactly.
We just paid for it by working, you know, I mean.
We had day jobs.
We just like paid for it with we did end up getting a Propeller Fund grant from the Andy Warhol Foundation via Three Walls and Gallery 400, which was $6,000. And I mean, that was like, I don't know, less than a quarter of the annual, you know.
Yeah.
It was like another salary. We worked all the time. We both had our, like, you know, 4 to 5 days a week, whatever work we're doing. And everybody we worked with understood that.
Yeah.
So everybody just like contributed whatever they could. And, you know, for some people, they actually could afford to fly themselves out, or they had miles, or,
Right.
you know.
Or whatever.
We literally would just scrap together every show with like, well, what do you have? Here's what we have. And, you
Yeah.
know, everybody would help
It sounds
out
a
in
little
different
new
ways.
agey, but I think really like
It
if you
works
just
out.
do something, it will somehow you'll find a way to make
Probably
it work.
we're the worst people to ask for like actual business, like artist business planning advice, because we're just like, just do it, it'll work out. Because if we actually tried to plan for the money that we had to come up with for this,
We probably would have been like,
would
it's
not have
impossible.
happened.
You can't do it. You can't do it.
It's show to show, and some shows have, it's whatever happens where you're like, oh, and we did sell some things a few times, not regularly, not anything to count on, but maybe like it was a few shows that we actually sold some things, and it was like, okay, bonus money, we can do XYZ. But I don't know, I can answer more specific questions about money. I'm not afraid to answer more specific questions about money, but it's hard.
Are you guys willing to, like, what are your future projects? Like another sort of gallery space?
Well, money and future projects.
Yeah.
We just very recently, this is like very recently, we were asked to so this is an art consultant that we've known for quite a while, who works with a lot of corporations, and they asked us to curate an exhibition, a contemporary art exhibition, that would have artist fees and like actual support for an exhibition. And we were like, sure, we'll like, but we had no idea what it was gonna be like, because we were like, oh man, what is a corporation? What is the culture of this place? But
As it turns out, they're like amazingly open-minded. They kind of sought us out. I mean, they sought us out to give them a proposal, and then we gave them a proposal, and we were honest, and they honestly were interested.
yeah. So that's something that happened very recently, and maybe we'll do it again. I don't know.
It actually
that's-
opened last night. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens there. But majorly what we're doing is just kind of grinding in the studio, because we're like, it just feels good to be able to be in the studio a lot. That was actually our plan. So we finished the gallery December 12, 2012 at midnight. And our plan was that all the past year leading up to now, we were just going to be in the studio. But what happened was like all these really weird opportunities came up, whether it was like curating or exhibiting. And, you know, we were like, like, you have the choice. You can either roll with it while these things are coming up, or you can kind of block yourself off and be like, well, my plan is to be in the studio right now. So we rolled with it, and still we're working in the studio, but not as much as you want to or need to really dig into your work. You know, it's like there's I feel like the last 3 years we've been able to maintain our studio practice, but that's really, really different than like developing it when you get to see your work do something really interesting. And I think that's what we're most hungry for right now. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask, in terms of your press releases and mailing lists and getting writers and buyers to come to your space, how does that work?
You just have to hustle really hard. You go to everybody else's stuff. You introduce yourself. You pay attention to what they're doing, and you talk about their work first. And you ask if they can be on your mailing list, if you want to do it via a mailing list. I think that there's no like rigid professional practices. It's all about like being sensitive and reasonable, and it's person to person. Some writers are like really happy to have you phone and call and email and chat a lot, and some are like, only get a hold of me if you know that this is what I'm interested in. And if you get a hold of me over something I'm not interested in, I'm not going to check your emails anymore. And you need to know the difference in those people.
Real quick, so you talked about pairing different disciplines, you know, in the top space and the bottom space, and how that might generate emergent meaning between the two pieces. Did you notice any emergent communities?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was really interesting to watch, because a lot of the artists, like, I'm thinking, like, there was like some sound artists who
People would start dating each other.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
It'd be all cute.
But it was just really interesting to watch some artists who were very stuck in their disciplines, and then because they happened to be in a show that they ordinarily, those things wouldn't have crossed, they became more open, and then they would start going to each other's, like, and so it would just, yeah, it was definitely, the communities merged and synthesized.
Yeah.
And we could feel it.
A lot of, you know, it's all like micro politics stuff. It's a small community, even though it's, but a lot of stuff softened. I felt like things where you're like, hey, it is a small community. We're all artists. We're all like, you know, let's not be rough with each other socially. It's totally it's unnecessary. And a lot of things softened, at least in our immediate experience.
Maybe we can take like one or two more questions.
Sure.
Now you guys don't have like the new capital space now, studio space now, and you're still doing curatorial projects. Do you feel like you're able to keep with your initial like kind of curating goals or mottos that you had put in place?
We have to fight for it more, for sure. If you're working in someone else's space, and if they're not being open,
I have been
then you have to
shocked.
negotiate. Like, you kind of become a mediator for the artist you're working with. You have to fight for them to provide for them what you want to provide for them. But if it's not all just your responsibility, if you're working with other people, then, you know.
I will say I've been shocked by how much people who run spaces or invite you to do curatorial work, like, they're supporting in the best way that they can, but they're actually, most people are pretty rigid about their space and how they do things and how they think something should be done. And our philosophy about supporting artists or supporting work is like, you go all out, and that's it. It's just like, what do you need? You need a ton of gravel? Let's do it.
We'll get a ton of gravel.
You know,
it will be here when you show up.
The truck can't be here until 5 p.m. and you have to work at 4 p.m. Okay, well then I'm gonna call my friend and see if they can be here, and they'll put the key over there, and then the guy, you know, and you figure it out. And that's how you make good work. And that's whether you have resources or not. And like, the only way you get resources is if you're doing that work when you don't have resources. And it is hard working in other people's spaces, because unfortunately that philosophy is not the standard. and I think that it should be. That's my moral opinion.
I feel like, everyone does better when we're all positive.
Yeah.
We were working somewhere recently where they were like, hey, here's you can install on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, but we leave at 7, so you're gonna have, and I was like, do you want me to make an art show in here or not? Like, what are you talking about? We made it work, but I just kind of felt like, what are you talking about? So I don't know what you guys are interested in doing or what you're already doing, but on whatever end of it that you're on, I feel like at this stage in the game, like you're going to school, you're committed, like it's like, it just has to be all the way, all the time, because I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you guys' backgrounds?
From what, say that again?
What are you guys' backgrounds?
We both went to the Art Institute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the short
I was in the painting department. You were in.
I did performance and art history, theory, and criticism.
And during that time, were you like thinking about doing something like New Capital?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Mm-mm.
No.
Just happened.
It's just what happened from like real life. I mean, it's not what my art plan was, but it's been awesome.